Hey everybody, welcome to my channel or welcome back to my channel. My name is Brian. Some of you may recognize this. This is our 2008 GTI. It's been at college with my son for a few years and it decided to develop a massive coolant leak. And it's outside the range of AAA towing for free anyway. So rented a U-Haul trailer, brought it home. Let's see what the coolant leak is. Okay, so there's about no coolant in it. So we'll go ahead and add some water because once we find the leak, I'm sure we'll let whatever's in there out and we'll be refilling it all with fresh coolant. I showed this kid on a previous video, actually when I was doing that car. So we'll screw this adapter on. And we will pump up the system and see where the water comes out. Let's see. Oh yeah. So it's kind of hard to see, but it's like it's pouring down the block from behind the alternator and the AC compressor. So that can be one of a couple different things. That could be the water pump. Thinking that could be the water pump. I think about the only part I have not replaced on this car that's plastic and touches the engine and has coolant would be the thermostat housing. So I think I'll go ahead and order both. This is coming out pretty good. And also, if it's the water pump, that's driven by the timing belt, which is due to be replaced anyway. So order some parts. So it's been about a month. I finally got the parts. Got time to get back to this. So I have a thermostat housing and a water pump and timing belt kit. So first we're going to go after the thermostat housing, which I think is the source of the leak. Before I go too far, I want to access that and see if we can pressurize the system and see if we see coolant pouring out there. Regardless, it's going to get changed anyway, as will the water pump and timing belt. Already removed the engine cover and also the belly pan. Depending on your car's condition, it may or may not already have those pieces removed. See a lot of warm air intakes where it eliminates all that because the real one, the air filter lives in there. So anyway, next up, we'll get this charge pipe out of the way. And then we start kind of trying to get the alternator out of the way. They call it a charge pipe. On this car, it's kind of just a tube that makes noise, goes up kind of in the car. Right here is an 8mm bolt, which is about the only time you use that socket. Down here, there's a T30. You use that T30 a lot, probably. There's this quick connect clip here. Sometimes you can just pull these up and they'll disconnect like that. There's also one right down here, same deal. Or sometimes you just pull them off. So this thing should come out of here now. So I've seen a lot of things that say you need to pull the tube off the throttle body, some other stuff. For right now, we'll go ahead and get the serpentine belt out of here. So with a 16mm wrench, you can push the belt adjuster down, and then right here you can slip an Allen wrench through a 3mm and hold it. So there's said Allen wrench slip through there, and that'll hold it. Now we can get the serpentine belt off. So just kind of try to remember how it goes on there. At least on this car, it's pretty easy. It's pretty short. I don't believe I've ever replaced this, but I'm not positive, and there's a new one in the kit. Next up, I believe this whole tensioner needs to come off, and it's going to have to come off to the timing belt job anyway. Those kind of look like 13s, so I'm going to get a 13. 1, 2. Feel like there's another one. So we'll start with a 2, and then we'll have to fish around possibly with a mirror. That is a 13. There is a third bolt right underneath where you really can't see it. And I had to get to it from the top using a hand ratchet. Couldn't use the electric one. See what this tensioner feels like. I don't know, it's a little bit noisy. I'll put the bolts back in here because there's going to be a lot and we're not going to remember where they go. For this alternator purposes, I've already disconnected the battery, by the way. Looks like a little hose we're going to have to pop off here. We may not need to, but at least it'll be loose. We can pop them back on if we don't need it to be off. It's not a big deal. It's like a 13 here, a 13 here. It almost looks like that's it. Looks like this 10 millimeter for this, probably a coolant pipe. It's going to need to come off, and then we'll go from there. Let's hope there's not a nut on the back. I should probably get a new battery. Let me go ahead and take this 10 off here. So this coolant pipe right here actually bolts on kind of what holds the dipstick tube on. And that nut's already gone, so it'll kind of slide down, but it's not going to come out of the way. So I'm going to go ahead, pretty sure all the coolant's already leaked out anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and get in here and disconnect it from this hose clamp. I feel like this is going to be kind of in the way for a lot of things. We'll see if this pick with kind of a flat end will get in there and kind of break that bond. I was able to wiggle the alternator kind of out of the way, get it off its mounts. There's a plastic tab we'll have to pop and get loose. Looks like an 8 millimeter nut right down here that's going to kind of hold the wiring loom on. And then looks like a 13 right there on the back of the alternator. So I'll get those out of there, see if I can get it out. So those connections are off. All right, that was actually pretty easy. So it was an 8 millimeter nut, and it was a 12 millimeter nut holding the power connection on. And then this was just a connection that popped off. So just for entertainment purposes, I can see the thermostat housing. I went ahead and put this hose I disconnected back on, because I believe the next step we're gonna have to start disconnecting some hoses from down there. So I'm going to pressurize the cooling system again. Hopefully there's enough coolant in there to leak and we can positively identify where the coolant's coming from in case it's somewhere else. Okay, so I guess it's fixed. It's not leaking. I'll make more of a mess later, but I'll go ahead and add some water so we know we have fluid in here. So now we're pressurized again with just water. It was leaking pretty darn good, so you would think it would start coming out somewhere. So I really haven't seen anything under the car leaking. I've replaced everything else coolant related that touches this engine that's plastic, so why not just do that too? So I'm going to go ahead, relieve this pressure. We'll go under the car and drain the coolant. Under the car, there's this auxiliary water pump, little electric deal. I've already taken the pressure off. So that's a good place to let the coolant come out. So I think we'll just break it loose there. But first of all, before I do that, this charge pipe needs to come out, and there's a connection over here at the intercooler. We might as well pull this clip off. And if you haven't done this in a while, or have never done it, there's probably going to be some oil in here. No, well, yeah, there's some oil in there. And there's a T30 right up here. Might as well get that. I think it's T30 before we're swimming in coolant. Mostly water at this point. You can follow this hose down. This is what your little noise pipe hooked to. There's a 10mm nut right here. You're going to want to get that off. It's kind of a flange nut. It's gone now. And then this hose kind of winds up and connects to the throttle body right here. A long regular screwdriver should get this. There's also a boost connection down here that you can't see either. So I think maybe when this comes loose we can access that better. It's been a while. Now you can at least see this clip down here holding that pressure sensor on. You can probably click up on something with it and pull it. So this is the boost hose connection. She's getting a little worse for the wear. And got a little twisted coming out of there. So we'll have to do a little fixing on that, or perhaps get a new one when we go back together. But I think what made this easier before was taking the radiator fans out. If we take the fans out, then just frees up a lot more room. And it should only be 4 screws and 1 wire connection down there at the bottom. And there's also been a code for a fan issue, like module or something. So maybe we can further inspect that. So let me get the fans out. I think they're going to be like a T30. So the fans have 4 of these kind of stainless T30 screws, just screwing it into the radiator. And then there's the big electrical connection right there. It has a little red tab you pull, and then just clicks and it pulls off. So yeah, taking the fans out makes working on this way easier. I should have remembered that. This is kind of hard to see, but there's a bolt, looks like a T30 in the front of this thermostat housing. That'll need to come out. So it might help if we looked at the new one. There's a clip down here on the bottom that clips this lower hose on. Hope that clip will come off, and then this hose should pull off. We just took that bolt out, so this connection should come off. And then there's a hose connection up here. Not sure what we're going to do with that one. Also, down here in the front, that bracket we just took the screw out of, looks like that pipe comes across right here, and that appears to be a triple square right there. So we'll go ahead and get that one out of there. And that was indeed a 5mm triple square. So I got that triple square out, and I kind of pried pried this coolant pipe out of the way. I'm not really sure whatever else this thing connects to, because wherever it is, I can't seem to find it. So we'll see if we can suffice with that. This one, I could not get the hose to unleash itself from the pipes, and I took it off the other end. So now there's a quick connect clamp right down there. It should slide off here. I removed the 2 bolts that are right down in here that hold this housing. One's there, one's down below it. Holds this to the block. I've also removed the quick connect clip that holds this hose onto the thermostat housing. That holds it onto here. And that plastic part will not move. So I've removed it from the radiator down here. Same kind of deal. And that one won't move either. So I'm just going to pop this. The whole housing should come off here now. And let's just see if we can get to something to get a hose disconnected from it. So let me try to get my hands all in here and get that out of there. So there it is. Ideally, it would have come apart right here where that hose hairpin clip goes. We just could have pulled this out, but of course that didn't happen. I was able to fish the whole thing out. Now I'll go probably put this in the vise and very carefully get this apart, because all we're replacing is the housing, and then I'll put the hose back in. I also pulled out the coolant temperature sensor because I couldn't get the electrical connector off, so I'll get this put back in the car and then see if we can fish this back in. I got the hose back in there. Now it's time for the thermostat housing. And actually, the O-ring from the old one kind of stayed in the block. I got it out. It looks clean. I'm just going to put just a little dab of grease on here to help make sure this thing goes in the right way. Some people are bound to take offense with this, but I've been doing it for years this way. And I also put a dab of grease on the hose and put the clip back on, and in here where the sensor goes, well actually the pipe, the sensor goes in the hose. I'll get that put back in, then we'll wrestle this in. None of this will probably show up. That's the bolt that holds that housing on there. Pretty much need a universal socket and a long extension, and hope it doesn't fall out when you get it sorted down in the hole. I feel like it started. And they just likely need to be snug. The angle's kind of bad here. And there's a metal piece. There's a metal sleeve in the housing itself, so you don't have to worry about crushing the plastic. So now I just need to get all these hoses back on there. So all that's back in there, hoses are hooked up. I think I'll wait putting the alternator back on, because next up, I'll tackle the timing belt. To do that, I'll go ahead and pull this wheel off, and I can't remember if the inner fender comes off, but we got to take motor mounts, all kinds of stuff off. So let me get started on that. I've removed the inner fender just to give some access to all that. I also took this coolant hose back off. I'm not sure it's necessary, but gives a little more access. There are probably a lot of different orders this can be done in. Let's see if we can get some of these timing cover bolts out. These are T30s. They're gonna have to come out anyway. There's probably another one on the back, but this timing cover broke. Last time I had it off, it had kind of adhered itself. So we'll eventually need to turn this around. There's a mark right here. It says OT for the timing. On time, I would assume. We can go ahead and pull the This motor mount needs to come off so we can get this washer fluid neck out of the way. We're back to the land of 10 millimeters now. This coolant tank. There's a couple bolts holding it in the back. And this should sort of kind of get out of the way. The low level sensor should be right here. Good thing that's empty, so that jam that out of the way. Put some of these screws back because after a while I sort of forget where they all go. And then more plastic clips break, but that's going to happen with a car this old. As I said, I disconnected this hose. That can come out of the way. So they were pretty much exposed. The timing belt and the OT mark. There should be a mark. There is. There's right here on the camshaft pulley. So we'll go down below with an 18 millimeter 12-point socket, and I'll turn this to at least line this up, and then we'll have to compare marks down below. I lied. This looks like a 19 or a 3/4 will fit. So let's turn that. I'll turn the crankshaft from down below. Wow, we look for our mark. So right there's the mark, that little dash. I'll find some paint to put on it. And then there's our OT mark, pretty much directly behind it. This is a 10 millimeter triple square. Now this balancer should just pull off. It has this little hole and nub that locates it in here. Looks like we got some little bit of debris down in there too. So I think part of this lower cover will come off now. At least there's 2 bolts here. Oh, they're tight too. Oh, and those feel like 30s. Oh. May have jacked this one up. We may have to resort to some pounding. I'm sure there's more up here somewhere. I can feel one right there. I think there's a couple around the back. I think all the bolts are out of the bottom timing cover, but it's loose, but pretty sure it's captured by this motor mount, which has to come out of here anyway. So I have a floor jack position with a block of wood. Just take a little bit of weight off the engine. This little support bracket has to come off. These are 13s. Of course, the 2 down here are 16s. So now we're left with this bracket attached to the engine. And I'm pretty sure we need to go in this direction. I think there's a plug that comes out somewhere that'll get whatever bolts attach to that. Down here in the fender well. There's a plug. Your car may or may not have it at this point in its life. So in behind there's a bolt we need to get. Thinking that's an 18. 16 buried up in there. Had to jack the engine up a little more, and through this hole is another 16mm bolt. Pretty sure there's another one somewhere. Way down in the back is a short 16mm bolt, which should kind of release this motor mount plate the rest of the way. Let me come up a little more. Oh, it's so close. It allows you to see another cover bolt, another T30 right under here. I think we'll allow this cover to come out of here. So there's the cover. And I'm not sure why this isn't coming out. There you go. Guess you just have to jack it up uncomfortably far. So there we go. There's the motor mount, or the bracket that holds the motor mount. Sure if this will show up, but the OT mark is right here. Put a little dab of silver paint there, along with right there on the camshaft sprocket. There's the notch, and that's some silver paint. And then on the balancer, there's a little notch right there that I've painted as well. And then on the lower timing covers, another OT, I painted it silver. So to line anything up, I need to stick this back on the car and stick the balancer back on to make sure our marks are right. So the balancer only goes on one way because of this little nub. So there's the cover back on. There's the OT mark, and it's lined up with that little notch on the balancer. We're lined up here, so now we should be good. Pull this back off and we can take the cam belt off. Now that we know our marks are good, we should be able to release this tensioner, which actually has a good old 13mm nut. There's an 8mm hex in here, which I should kind of back the tension off. With that loose, we can go ahead and pull this tensioner off at this point. The timing belt can come off too. Just out of curiosity, let's spin this. And you can hear that bearing a little bit. This whole belt should come off. Back in the day, these used to really crack on the surface, but looks okay. I mean, it's worn a little bit. Remember, it's a Conti Tech brand. So there's a roller, which you probably can't see right here. Roller down there, it doesn't sound the greatest. We'll go ahead and get those out while we're here. And as I recall, these are different. The offset's different, so your kit will have multiple ones, but they'll only go on one way. So no, that's the upper one. Apparently they have different sized nuts too, or bolts. I guess this one's a 12. Part of the reason for this whole escapade this time, even though it was due, was a coolant leak. So when it looks like the thermostat housing wasn't the problem, the next logical place was the water pump. And it feels like it has a little bit of play in it. And it looks like it might have been leaking, but I'm going to go ahead and get it off there. Alright, the 3 bolts are out of it. Should come out. There's a little spot where you can assist it. There might be coolant behind here, there might not. So there we go. I don't know, it's kind of dirty and it feels like it has a little bit of play in it. And it looks, I don't know, kind of corroded around that O-ring. But anyway, we've got a new one to go in. I don't know if you can hear that, but the bearings in it don't sound the greatest. So probably a good thing we're doing this now. And I can feel some play in it. In case this hole's corroded, because that seal is just an O-ring, take a little Scotch-Brite and just clean that up while we're here. Bought a kit. It has a timing belt, tensioner, some bolts, nuts, the rollers, water pump, SERP belt. I got it from these people. Has some other nuts and bolts in there. And also a seal for either the crank or the cam. I think I'm going to skip that trouble this time. Doesn't look like they're leaking, so we'll just save that for another day. This water pump just has an O-ring, so that should seal it. We'll get this back in there. Got that clean. I put a dab of motor oil on that O-ring just so it doesn't tear sliding in. Some people may take issue with that. Reuse the same bolts. This is an instance where tight enough is probably okay. Those are just M6 bolts. You don't want to break them off in the block. They shouldn't come out, and there's no play in that pump, so that's good. So in this instance, you really can't mix them up. So this top one has the protrusion and takes the bolt with a 13 millimeter head. Looks about like an 8 millimeter stud. New ones came in the kit. The lower one goes over this little boss right down here, and it looks like it's more of an M10 with a 12 millimeter head. So it keeps you from mixing them up. Since they came with new bolts, there's probably a Torx spec somewhere. This lower idler with the larger stud goes to 25 foot-pounds is what I found. And the upper one with the smaller bolt, with the larger head, with a 13 millimeter head, it torques to 18 foot-pounds. 16, 17, We'll give it a little more, 18.5. And if you want to get technical, the water pump bolts go to 7 foot-pounds. All our components are back in there, so I'm sure this is going to be rather difficult to show, but our timing marks haven't moved. We have the new belt. I've cleaned out all the garbage, or most of the garbage at the bottom of the timing belt cover. New timing belt, it doesn't care what direction it goes. You just don't want to crimp it, break the reinforcement. And we'll start by getting it around the crankshaft pulley. Come on up around the water pump pulley because it really doesn't care. It's not a timed component. Go under this idler. We should engage with the right teeth, unless it slips. Basically, we want to start at the bottom and keep our tension all the way up around. But before I do that, I need to get the actual tensioner. So we're not going to be able probably really to show this once it goes in there. But this tab here goes in the spot where this core plug is. The kit came with a new stud. I think that one will be fine. So it came with a new nut. We'll put that on. So we can go ahead and get this slipped in position. So this large metal tab goes right in there, and then when we get the belt on, we'll rotate this around. So once the spring tension's on there, this green dot right here, I believe, should rotate around and line up with this notch, and then we know it's tight enough. We hold it with the hex, and then we tighten the nut and torque it. So less words, more doing. So we'll get that stuck in there. Get this back around, crank pulley down here, get the teeth engaged. You want to keep that tight. Let it drop in the water pump. So you want to keep it tight from the crank pulley around the water pump under this idler, and get it to drop in the teeth on the crankshaft or the camshaft pulley on top. We'll probably have to slide out. It'll show without these stupid hoses in the way. Slide the tensioner out to get the belt started on it, and then push the belt on the camshaft pulley. Now I need to make sure that that metal recess gets back in that core plug, freeze plug location, whatever you want to call it. So I had to ever so slightly move the camshaft forward to get teeth to drop in, but we haven't turned the engine. Nothing's jumped. We're around all the idlers, and now that it's put on, it shouldn't move. Well, I find the nut I dropped. So that came with a new nut. Now we need to take our 8mm hex and engage it right there in the tensioner pulley with this little boss on it. And then we should turn that. And that should allow the tensioner to come around and kind of self-align itself. So let me get you in nice and dirty here. So as I turn this, you should see this line up. Not sure if that's going to show up, but there's a notch and there's that little green raised boss right there. Those should line up when it's tensioned properly. Let me back it off a little bit. See how this notch is down here? So what we're talking about is right here, this little green spot and this notch. As I turn this, they'll kind of line themselves up. So they should be across from each other, pretty close. And that should be where we want it. Maybe a short 13mm socket will do it. Now we should be able to drop that shit right in the floor. Try this one more time. Get our 13mm socket on there. Drop it again. Pick it up again. Get our 13mm socket on there. Turning the right direction. And just snug that up. And hope nothing turns. Feels all right. The correct torque for this is 17 foot-pounds. The goal being as we tighten this, it doesn't turn the tensioner. Looks like we're good. Now our mark is still lined up there. I can put the lower cover back on because that's what has our mark. I could have made my own mark, but I believe we'll be all right. Stick the balancer back on. I'll go ahead and put one bolt back in it so it doesn't fall off. Now, with everything lined up, properly torqued, snug, I'll turn the engine over 2 times. I'm gonna have to let it down a little bit to engage the crank bolt properly. I'll look down in, verify my mark is lined up down there. It's as good as it's gonna get. Now I'll turn it. It'd be easier to turn if the spark plugs were out of it. So, this light's about to die, but there's our silver mark. And silver mark on the OTs. Got the same thing there. We got the silver and the silver. So all that should be good. Now, let me put all this back together. So we're getting back together. I have a new serpentine belt on there. There's the part number. Now we should be able to, if I can do this one-handed, use this is a 16mm wrench on this little section of the tensioner. Push against it, pull your Allen wrench out, or drill bit, or whatever fits in there. All right, so that belt's back on. I believe I have all the coolant hoses back on it. Just have some boost pipes, that to go back in the fans. But the cooling system should be buttoned up and reconnected. You may have seen this in a previous video, but we will vacuum fill this cooling system. This makes it work way easier, so I bought this kit on Amazon, and I'll put a link down there. Thought I would use it once every couple years, and this is the second time in like 2 months. So basically it comes with all these adapter caps. You saw earlier where you can pressure test it, but it also comes with this cone and this connection where we can hook an air compressor to it, pull a vacuum in the cooling system, and then we can suck the coolant back in. We don't have to mess around trying to bleed it, etc. This works on the Venturi principle. This goes in here. This is what we pull the coolant in with. We'll leave that off for now while we pull the vacuum. Hook an air hose up here. Open this valve. hear some gurgling somewhere, so that tells me we have some sort of leak that I missed. So we obviously had some sort of coolant leak, so it's the next day. Pulled the alternator off, pulled the throttle body off to see if there was anything else. We could see added water. It was coming out around the thermostat housing. Pulled the thermostat housing back off, and there was like a little piece of trash, like almost like the size of a hair, down inside where the O-ring seals to the block. So where that O-ring would seal up against the block, it was like some of this plastic had chipped off and stayed in there, and that stopped the O-ring from sealing. So got that cleaned out, blew out, Scotch-Brite as much as I could reach it. Put it back together, and I've put 15 pounds of pressure on it, and it has held overnight. So now that we filled it back up with water, we'll go underneath, pop a hose off, get the rest of the water off, put all this back together, and then maybe we can start the car. So now we're going to resume where we thought we were about done yesterday. We'll try pulling a vacuum again in the cooling system. We'll let that sit there a while, right there at the yellow and red. I believe we're good though, but we'll give that a few minutes. This is all I can really find around here for coolant, but it's supposed to be compatible. So this hose has a brass kind of fitting to keep it heavier at the bottom of the bottle. Go ahead and let it go to the bottom. Should be able to open this valve over here, and it should draw in coolant. Almost out of that bottle. We'll get another one. I guess it kind of depends where you shop as to what you get. Should all be compatible. I'm going to stop it right there. Go ahead and let it suck in the rest of this. And we're up there, kind of in the range. So I think we're pretty close. Now I'll put the rest of this back together. So we're almost back together. I need to put the fans back in. So this car had a fault, or a code for a fan control module. So the fan control module lives apparently right here in the back of the big fan, and then it just sends 12 volts over to the small fan. I jumped 12 volts right to this fan, and it didn't move at all, didn't do anything. So you can buy that module, or you can buy a whole set from VW for like $300, or you can take your chances and go on Amazon and get a whole set for like a little over $100. So I did pull this apart and jump 12 volts to this fan, and it did run on the new one. So we're going to give this a shot. Let me get those in there. It's just this one connection down here and 4 screws that hold it in. It's pretty easy. Okay, we're all back together, other than I need to put the inner fender liner in. Maybe if you have one of these cars, you should probably take the inner fender out and clean some of that junk out so it doesn't rust in there. So I'll go ahead and do that. This all started for a coolant leak. Replaced the thermostat housing, which may or may not have been the problem. Went ahead and replaced the water pump timing belt because it was due anyway. Had an issue with the thermostat housing not sealing correctly. Got that straightened out, filled it with coolant, put everything I think back together. Now we should be able to hook the battery back up. Let's try to start it. We also replaced the fan module, so let's see if the air conditioning works now. Well, the fans are running, so that was better than before. And the low side line is right there. It's getting ice cold, so it should be blowing cold air. So maybe that was our problem the whole time. Yeah. There we go. There's how to do your timing belt and replace your thermostat housing, or how not to do it in your 2008 GTI or a GTI with a BPY engine and a timing belt. And maybe you can accidentally fix your air conditioning at the same time. Thanks for watching. See you next time.